Coming up, readings beyond the raffle and Theoryland-approved conjecture.
Deep dive into the spells and scrolls of nerd culture.
Absorb Stormlight.
Hone sympathy.
Harness Sayadar and Sayadine.
This is Phantology.
You may have heard of us.
All right, how's it going, independent fantasy readers and publishers out there? This is Steven with a special episode of Phantology. I'm joined today by Randall McNally, the author of Shadowless, which is a independently published work that I just had the pleasure of reading. So how's it going, Randall? Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, no, pleasure's all mine. Good for having me on. Thank you.
And you're coming from Ireland, right?
Yeah, sunny Ireland, right on the other side of the Atlantic.
So I just finished Shadowless not too long ago. It took me a little bit to actually get started, as last year we were kind of recapping a bunch of popular books, and then now we're getting into the first of our authors series. We're going to try to do these monthly, independently published things to start off, try to do a bit of a writer's lift type of thing on Twitter. So thank you so much for agreeing to be the guinea pig. Well, hopefully this goes well.
Yeah, no problems.
Okay, so Shadowless, I'm going to say, is one of the more unique fantasy books that I have read. And I think it's mostly due to the structure. So we're not going to do too many spoilers for the actual content of the book. But high level, Shadowless has 20 chapters, and each chapter is almost a short story in of itself. And there's a different main POV character. They kind of start crossing over once you get towards more of the climax, the end of the book. It's a really interesting way to structure it, and I think I think it works. I think it's kind of cool because as you get into it, you're like, okay, you know, we're exploring the world from all these different perspectives, and then it comes together for the big climax, and there's a lot of payoffs towards the end of the book. So that's kind of what I tell people when I've been telling people I'm reading this this independent book and it's unique. That's kind of my pitch to people. Like, hey, if you want to read a fantasy book that's a little bit different than your typical structure, this is the one. How do you pitch your book, Randall?
So Shadowless isn't like other books. Its chapters aren't in sequence and they're not in chronological order. And it's
that as well.
It's a real slow burner, but I think necessarily so. So, you know, without going into any spoilers, if I had gods ripping down cities in the first chapter, then there's nowhere really you can go from there. You know.
Okay. Yeah.
So the first chapter is like a coming of age story where a boy discovers he has no shadow. He asks his uncle why, and he's told why he has no shadow and what the consequences of that are. The second chapter introduces some of the main villains of the story, the High Priest and the Shadow Watchers, and what their motives are. The third chapter would introduce Amradan, who's probably one of the main protagonists, and how he keeps appearing and weaving his way through the narrative. And then, of course, you know, chapter 4, you know, touches on the gods themselves. So these are the four main elements of the story, and I couldn't really put them all into one chapter. It would have been information overload. So what Shadowless does is it drip feeds information to the reader. It gives the reader the pieces of the puzzle and asks them to work it out for themselves. What it doesn't do is it doesn't put everything on the plate and spoon feed the reader. So it is definitely a slow burner.
Yeah, and readers of modern fantasy do not want a spoon fed thing, right? We don't like the info dumps anymore. We like to be able to try to have these complex narratives where we are the ones, you know, the onus is on the reader to figure it out. And I agree. I think it does a really good job. I think you did a great job with that.
Yeah, like I said, it's not in chronological order. So if you hear in chapter 4 that a character has died, and then that character appears in chapter 12, then you have to join the dots. You have to say, okay, chapter 12 was actually, we're going back in time and we're reading about how this character may or may not have died. And you know, Stephen, it doesn't work for everybody. I've had a few people who said they just had to put it down in DNF. It did not finish, but hopefully it's unique. I mean, it hasn't been completely panned by any of the critics or reviewers, and it has got some positive feedback, and that it's original.
Yeah, and I've seen you're fairly active on Twitter, so I've seen a lot of some different reviews that I know you've retweeted, and yeah, it's nice to see some positive buzz out there. So let's see. Before we talk too much more about the book, tell me more about kind of yourself, your background with fantasy. What are some of your favorite books, and what inspired you to write?
Well, I grew up watching films like Clash of the Titans and Jason of the Argonauts. Um, I read, I don't know if you have them in the States, they're the Peter Jackson fighting fantasy books. They're the ones where if you go left, you turn to page 34, and if you go right, you turn to page 72.
Oh yeah, those are fun. Those are
Yeah,
fun when I was a kid. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. I grew up reading those types of books.
Uh
And
huh.
I played games like Baldur's Gate and Neverwinter Nights and other online RPGs.
Okay.
I read a lot of Tolkien, Lord of the Rings, and Hobbit, obviously, the Dragonlance Chronicles, and Dune by Frank Herbert, and his Dark Materials, and a lot of H.P. Lovecraft, a lot of Call of Cthulhu. So
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
it just made sense that they say that you should maybe write what you know. So I ended up writing fantasy.
Yeah, I feel like all of those influences, I can kind of see how those all have affected Shadowless in different ways. One of the strongest, obviously, being like a Greek mythology type of thing where you have demigods in Shadowless.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the idea for Shadowless was rolling around in my head for a while. To my knowledge, there isn't anything out there like it, or at least if there is, I haven't come across it. I was always fascinated with the idea of gods meddling in the affairs of mortals. Like I said, I'm a huge fan of Clash of the Titans, the original, the one with Laurence Olivier and Maggie Smith. And what Shadowless does is it takes Clash of the Titans and takes it one step further and maybe puts a dark twist on it.
Yeah, there are certainly some darker elements to the book. I saw a review in, I think, Grimdark magazine or one a site similar to that. So was that I'm assuming that was a decision you had to make. If how what kind of tone
Yeah,
when you decided to put in that darker tone, how did you decide that?
yeah. It was. I wanted to make it as realistic as possible, as realistic as can be when gods and dragons are involved. It is. It is grimdark. I mean, it is the subgenre of fantasy of grimdark. Uh, Bad things happen in the book, and yes, some of the main characters even die. But I would rather have that than have something like a soap opera, where everyone has plot armor and nothing
Okay.
bad ever happens. There are some of the elements of the book which are for a more mature audience.
So, what was the process of writing like for you? And just kind of talk about how long did it take you to write the book? What was the publishing landscape like? How did you decide to self publish? And what's it been like since then?
The book itself took 2 years to write and 3 years to produce from start to finish. I'm not a full-time writer. I'm a project manager for an IT firm in Ireland, so I had to write in evenings. I had to write at the weekends, on holidays. So that's probably why it took so long.
It's also a longer book. I mean, you're pumping out over 500 pages here. So, 3 years for full time authors. I mean, that's not bad at all.
Yeah, it was. It was a tough process, definitely. I haven't really written anything before Shadowless, so the only reason I got into writing was because I was in a job a few years back that I didn't particularly like, and writing was a bit of escapism. So I didn't set out to write a book. I just set out to write a few short stories. So one was based in the frozen north, another one was based on a jungle, another one in a city. So when the idea for Shadowless came about, then I had to go back and rewrite some of the chapters. in order to make it all connect. But I think it's worked.
Okay, that kind of touches at another thing I wanted to ask you about. There are a lot of different settings in Shadowless, and I think this is another one of the stronger elements of the book is just the world building in general. You have a really large map, and I think almost every different area is touched on in some of the different short stories. So, how did you come up with all of these different settings, and how did you decide that you wanted to have, I guess, such a sprawling landscape? Because some epic fantasies kind of keep it to one area in the first book, or they will journey around. I guess the decision to just cover the whole continent in the first book, that must have been something that you had to juggle.
Yeah, the map is the map's something else. It was done on Photoshop and took about
Okay.
250 hours.
It looked like, yeah, it looks like a lot of work. Did you, and you made that as well?
Yeah, I had to take out a Photoshop subscription, and the map keeps changing. So if something goes on if something goes on in the book, and a character has to be between two cities in 4 days, and those cities are 6 days away, then one of the cities has to get moved and come closer
Yeah,
to the
yeah,
other.
yeah.
Yeah, so the book itself is set in the Northern Realms, and it's like a supercontinent. It's frozen tundra in the north, and jungles in the south, and deserts, whatever in between. So yeah, I didn't really want to restrict myself to just one environment. I think that you have to maybe set the different characters in realms or situations which they're going to necessarily be found almost like natural habitats. So, chapter 3, Cayenne Fellstrom, her powers are all based around the elements, the snow and cold and ice. So
Right.
it didn't make sense to set her chapter in a desert. Tundra Evergreen is essentially a ranger type character, so he had to be in the deep jungles or the deep woods.
Okay. So was it the powers that were set first, and then because of that, kind of the landscape and the settings evolved, or was it just kind of back and forth between the two?
I think for a book this size, you have to have a map. It's okay, describing these places, giving them names, telling people what they're like and what their laws
Hmm.
and religion are. But unless they can see it, I don't think it really makes much sense. So if you look at all the most successful fantasy genres, they all have a map. Tolkien had Middle Earth, George R. R. Martin had Westeros. So there has to be something tangible that, and as you rightly say, there's 20 chapters, each one probably set in a different place. But by including a map, what the reader is able to do is he's able to refer to the first page of the book, which has the map on it, and then find out where that character is in the world.
And I'll say, not only is the map really cool, and like you say, there's jungle and tundra and desert, but then when you go into the cities themselves, some of these cities have some pretty unique concepts to them. I think my favorite are there are these two kind of neighboring sister cities, Stormhaven and Tarantum. And
Mm-hmm.
Stormhaven is really noble, and Tarantum is very corrupt. And there's this intricate lift system between the two that takes you back from the under the subterranean area to the heights. And I mean, I was really involved in the setting from just one chapter of reading about these things. So props there. I think that is definitely one of the selling points of the book.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I went into a lot of detail. I had a few ideas for, the rail system in between the cities. Like I done astrophysics at university,
Okay.
so I had to come up with what angle would the rail carts be able to, in order to get them moved
Okay.
in
Okay.
between, how would there be light underground? So you would have to introduce water and then bring in, phosphorescent plankton or algae that would
Yeah.
glow and let the people decide. So yeah, it worked.
Yeah, I love having these conversations because you peel back the layers and you realize, like, okay, he didn't just put this in and say it and figure it would work. there's a lot of thought that goes into all this to actually make it work. Maybe if it actually existed in real life.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I wanted to ask, are you more of an outliner or a discovery writer? I'm going to hazard a guess to be that you're much more of an outliner. Like you have 20 chapters, you've got all these characters and structures and this huge map. And so I'm guessing this was all set up pretty well, but there must have been some element to where you put the characters out there and then you just kind of, were you ever surprised by things that the characters chose to do as you were writing them?
So I guess the question is it a plotter or a pantser? A plotter
Okay.
kind of
Okay.
is everything, and then a pantser types by the seat of his pants. At the start,
Okay.
everything was just off the cuff.
Uh-huh.
I didn't have anything. I had a blank canvas, and anyone could do anything. The longer it went on, then I had to start plotting because, like I say, if a character or a bunch of characters had to make a journey and only had a week to get there, then point A and point B had to be a week apart. They couldn't be any less, or any more rather. So I did have, like I say, I'm a project manager at the minute, so I do have software tools that
Uh-huh.
kind of let me keep track of people's whereabouts, and where they
Okay.
are, and what their ages are, and how long it takes for them to travel in between destinations. I'm actually writing a sequel. I'm halfway through the first draft of sequel,
Oh, nice.
so
Okay.
halfway
I
through 10.
wanted to ask you about that.
Yeah, I'm about 10
Yeah.
chapters in of the, but I'm finding that I'm spending half my time rereading the first book to find out where these characters are, what they're doing, and trying to make sure that there's no errors in terms of continuity.
Yeah, yeah. That appears to be the curse of modern fantasy a little bit. I know, and sometimes I tune into Brandon Sanderson's live streams, and there was one where one of his assistants was showing this huge Excel sheet of every character and chapters and locations, and it's like, holy cow! How does anyone produce these books anymore on this level? Just the
Yeah,
things you have to hold in your head, or the detail you have to go into, because if you make any continuity errors, people on Reddit are just gonna blow it up and expose it, and yeah,
absolutely.
that must be a ton of work.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts, and there's a lot of characters and a lot of supporting characters in Shadowless. So I keep a list of names, and if I go to name someone, I make sure that name hasn't been already taken. And if someone's in a city in the book, in the sequel, then there's a good chance that I might bump into someone from the first book. So
Uh-huh.
it's good to put things like that in. I know that one reviewer said when he was reviewing the book, about maybe 10 or 12 times he sat back and, okay, that's why that happened 3 chapters ago. Kind of, there is several moments in the book where light bulbs should go off, that everything happens for a reason.
Yeah, those are really nice payoff moments. I also noticed it that there were a few times. I don't know if I caught 10 or 12, but there were at least a few times for me. It was like, oh, there they are. That's why, there was one time where the knight comes out of a that magical
Curiosity.
shop.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
curiosity shop with an object that
Uh-huh.
was used in the previous chapter,
Yeah.
and he was just kind of referred to, and so then you see connections like that. Yeah, those moments are always fun. Those are just like small little payoffs that I'll make you want to keep on reading.
Yeah. Yeah.
So okay, so you've got at least, I mean, you have more than 20 characters, but you have 20 chapters, and for the most part, every chapter is focused on a different viewpoint character.
Yeah.
So which of the 20 characters is your favorite? Is it Amradam?
It's not. I don't know if I'm meant to have a favorite, but I do have a soft spot for Clanatar, Clanatar Novastus, the
Okay,
the plague, the plague lord. He,
interesting choice.
yeah, I don't know. I don't know why. No one in the book talks like Clanatar talks, and no one acts the way Clanatar acts. I don't know. He's also, without giving too much away, he's also the only Shadowless character who's found a way of contacting
Yeah.
the god who fathered him. So he does stand out from the crowd.
Yeah, for the most part, he's got a little different motivation than most of our main Shadowless characters.
Yeah, I tried to avoid the cliches of writing heroes and villains,
Uh-huh.
but Clanatar is essentially an evil character, and I don't know, maybe I grew up rooting for the Joker and Lex Luthor and the Green Goblin, and again, one of the, like I said, there's a lot of moving parts in the book. One of the main concepts is that the Shadowless characters get more powerful as they get older, so their power kind of wells up, as they age. And Clanatar is one of the oldest of the Shadowless characters, so
Yeah, there's some good elements to this magic system you have where the Shadowless characters are the offspring of the gods and they can as such manifest some magical powers. Kind of varies depending on, I'm assuming depending on who their father is,
mhm.
and associated with the aspect of that god. And then as they get older, there's also an element of like if there's multiple sons or daughters of the god, and then if if a son or daughter is killed, then you can then get some of their power. So then the
Yeah.
sibling becomes more powerful, and then the gods themselves want to kill their children in order to suck their power back in as the children have gotten older. So I really like it because it kind of works, right? Like there's some hard rules here, and then there's a lot of ability there to explore. I mean, you have the ability as the author to make the children's powers vary based off of strength and specific power to some extent, and you do this really well. There's a lot of different types. I mean, we almost have like the full range of all the X-Men here with all
Yeah,
their different powers. Were
that's
there any powers that you liked more than others? Like what were some of your favorites? Sounds like the plague bringing power was a favorite.
yeah, yeah. You touched on it. You're 100% right. All the Shadowless power, all the Shadowless characters have a power which I've tried to base around the god that fathered them. It didn't always work out that way, but in general, it does. But I don't want them to be. This isn't the Avengers set in medieval times.
Uh-huh.
One of the characters can only turn invisible if he runs really fast. Another can only use their power on the 3 days of the month whenever the moon is at its brightest and fullest. So
Yes.
yeah, so I didn't want it to be the X-Men, in medieval times. Yeah, some of them are. Some of the powers are interesting. One of the characters, Willow Firthrak, is based around sound. So she can, scream and shatter glass, or almost
Mhm.
like, a sonic roar. And she can, negate sound around her. So yeah, being coming from a science background, a bit of thought did go into them. It wasn't just, I didn't just come up with them on the spot. I did actually research them and think them
Nice.
through.
Yeah, and there's a lot of appetite for that nowadays. People like to have the harder magic system. Thank you, Brandon Sanderson, but that's just kind of how modern fantasy is working for a lot of folks these days. I'm gonna say my favorite characters. I went down to two. I really liked Valen or Valen, however
Uh-huh.
you say it, and Kurt. Valen is the one that you just referenced that can he's an assassin,
Yeah.
and he's our invisible guy. And Kurt, if I understood this right, was basically just super strong
Yeah.
and an excellent fighter.
Yeah. That's it. Everything in the book it's been kind of taken, the inspiration has been taken from something. It's not too difficult to work out where the inspiration from Kurt comes from. If you've ever seen the film Gladiator,
That's what I. Yep, Gladiator,
there
definitely.
is
Uh huh.
there's
Uh huh.
there's a huge guy in Gladiator who's one of the other gladiators in the film, and that's where the inspiration from Kurt came from. Yeah, all the other Shadowless characters can maybe blend into the crowd, and their powers aren't on show all the time. but Kurt is 7 foot tall and a quarter of a ton. So he, his powers are there for all to see.
Okay, so you spent 3 years writing Shadowless, and you finished the book. Did you feel out the traditional publishing route? Did you think, like what was your, what was your goal going in? Did you try the whole agent route or anything like that, or did you just think self-publishing was the way?
Self-publishing wasn't an option. I didn't self-publish as an option. I self-published by self-published through lack of option. I went around. I contacted 20 agents and 10 publishers, and the ones that came back to me all said the same thing, Stephen. They all said, "Great concept, love the idea, strong writing, but just not what we're looking for at the minute."
Okay.
And so no one wanted to take a punt on it.
What are they looking for then? I mean, Grimdark is popular, hard magic systems are popular, fantasy is popular.
Yeah, well, you say it's popular. If you go into a bookstore, maybe I think you guys have, is it Barnes and Noble in the
Yeah,
States?
yeah.
If you go into a bookstore, then the women's literature section is maybe 20 times bigger than the fantasy.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair.
And sci-fi.
I guess I was just focusing on the fantasy genre. I'm way too involved in that.
Yeah, no, you're right. They weren't willing to take a punt on it, so it was either keep the book on my hard drive or publish it myself. So I published. I went down the route of publishing it myself. I would have definitely went with a publisher had one have been interested, but they weren't. But I think it turned out well. People have said that Shadowless looks like a professional book, professionally published book, and if that's the case, then it's because I hired professionals all throughout the process. The proofreader had 10 years experience and had won awards for her work.
Okay.
The copy editor was a retired English lecturer, a university English lecturer. The formatting was done by a graphic design company in Kentucky, and the cover was done by a professional digital artist in the Philippines. So really, ironically, the only person who didn't know what they were doing producing the book was me. It was my debut book, so.
Well, now now you are a professional. Now you're the author.
Well, yeah, I don't know about that, but yeah, thanks.
So these are all just different folks who kind of do some freelance work that you're able to find?
Well, I mean, I had to source them. I had to go on and find out who did it and read reviews and contact them.
Okay.
Everything in self-publishing costs money, Stephen, and these people weren't cheap. If I'd known just how much it was going to cost, I might have had second thoughts about ever going down the self-publishing route, because it's not cheap. Definitely not. And there's hidden costs, in the UK, the ISBN numbers on the back of the book, they cost like 150. Well, they would cost $200 for
to
10
register
of them.
Your book. Then
to register it. Like I say, the map keeps changing, and you can't buy Photoshop as a software tool. You have to pay a subscription.
Yeah.
So it's like $15 or $20 a month for 3 years. So it's the costs definitely do add up. I mean, I would never try and talk anyone out of ever writing a book. I think it's a great experience, and I've definitely learned a lot from it. But what I would say to any prospective author going down the self-publishing route is do your research and think long and hard about how much you want to spend on it, because books are like a money pit. You can just shovel money into them and see very little in return.
Yeah, I've heard somewhat of the same advice from other authors, kind of more along the veins of, look, if you're really passionate about being an author, then don't necessarily put all your eggs in that basket in terms of like making a bunch of money. Like if you're a fantasy author that is able to make enough money to be full-time and make a good living, you're doing really, really well. And for the most part, it just becomes a passion project for a lot of people.
Yeah, it is. Very few authors make enough money in order to make a living off it. I thought I had most of the angles covered. The formatting and the typesetting, the cover artist, the proofreader. I had beta readers. The one thing I hadn't accounted for was PR, or make people aware of it. And
Yeah.
when I uploaded it onto Amazon, I think it had one sale in the first month. and after spending quite a bit of money on it, and I knew the person who bought it was the worst thing. So yeah,
Yeah.
when the sales don't happen, then it really is, it can be a bit crushing.
So what was your approach for PR? I know you're pretty active on Twitter.
I mean, I do send out a lot of tweets. There's a company in the UK who do physical print run. So I've got 30 or 40 hardback copies of the book, and I contact reviewers, and offer them a free copy in exchange for an honest review. And at the minute, that's where maybe most of my reviews come from. And then appearing on maybe your show, or getting a write up in Grim Dark magazine. When something like that happens, then you do tend to see a spike in sales. But the book is nowhere near having paid for itself yet.
This is interesting because one of my life aspirations, we'll see if I ever get there. I would love to write something. I have some ideas, but I haven't really gotten too far into it. And you might be making me second guess some of this.
Yeah, like I say, I would never put anyone off writing a book. I think it's a great experience. I enjoyed most of the process. I because of writing the book, I'm able to meet people like yourself, or I've met people that I would never meet ordinarily, but I would give it a lot of thought. Yeah, copy editors and proofreaders and graphic design companies and cover artists all cost money. Now, I probably could have went slightly cheaper and got, I went out and tried to get the best people that I could. I could have probably went a little bit cheaper
Uh-huh.
and saved a bit of money, but I think the book would have suffered. It may not have came across as professional as it did. So yeah, I would just err on the side of caution and crunch the numbers before anyone decides to go down
Yeah.
the self
Okay, so
publishing.
I'm not going to quit my job tomorrow and
No,
go all
no,
in on writing.
no. I didn't quit my job either. Writing's just a sideline.
Yeah, yeah. Cool. Okay, yeah, thanks for the info on the self-publishing. I always think that's an interesting topic.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you can get an agent and you can get a publishing house behind you, then great, But for most writers who can't get it, and like I say, you go into any bookstore, sci-fi and fantasy section is tiny compared to the rest. So yeah, if you are gonna pick something, then maybe have a look around. If you're doing it, different people have different reasons for writing. But if you if you want to do it for money, don't write fantasy or sci-fi. Is all I can advise.
Well, so I hope the genre keeps on. I feel like it's gained some steam in recent years. Obviously, Game of Thrones being on TV, I think that really helped the genre in general. And
Yeah,
hopefully, if the Wheel of Time TV show does well, Lord of the Rings is coming back. Netflix is making some fantasy shows. I think TV. I mean, I hate to say it, but I think the TV watchers probably do hopefully bleed into the book readers, and I just hope reading books doesn't become a dying art as people
yeah,
just kind of get sucked more and more into the television.
yeah. I think I don't think it'll ever go away completely. It does seem to be making a seismic move towards audiobooks, and I think that I would
Yes.
I would like to find someone And if there's someone out there listening to your podcast, then by all means contact me. But I would like to try and turn Shadowless into an audiobook.
Yes, audiobooks. They are huge. I do a few audiobooks. I mean, I try to have one that I'm listening to, one that I'm reading, the listening one being maybe more like I don't need all the details. And I'm reading Malazan Book of the Fallen right now, and I cannot listen to that. I have to read those because they're just way too complex. But Shadowless is an audiobook. That needs to happen.
Yeah.
Okay, so going back to the book a little bit, I wanted to ask, have you heard any crazy theories, or have people come to you with any ideas that have just, like, you've been really surprised at directions people have gone with what they've read?
Not in terms of the book, no. Like I say, it hasn't been panned by anybody so far. Some people just don't get it. Like I say, there's a lot of moving parts going on in the book. If I had to go back and I had to do one thing differently, they say you should never have two main characters with the same letter beginning with their names.
Okay.
I didn't know that. I didn't find this out until maybe halfway through the book, and by then, Arfarius and Amradam were already well established.
Yeah.
But I have some people maybe haven't paid as much attention to the book, and some people thought they were maybe the same person. So
Yes, that would be confusing.
yeah, I have had to explain to a few people. But it's not the type of book that just gives you everything on a plate. Like I say, you really have to be tuned in, because if something happens in the book, it generally has happened for a reason, and it'll be either foreshadowing or something will definitely happen.
Okay, so that's a nice little rule of thumb that I hadn't heard before, but makes total sense. Or is there any other feedback or anything you learned after writing Shadowless that you didn't realize going into writing the book?
No, most of the feedback has been good. The people who didn't finish it because of the structure. There's 20 chapters, and in general, each chapter deals with a different point of view, a different character. Now that may sound a bit overload, but in one of the earlier chapters, we meet the only pair of twins in the book, Kurt and Yana. So even though the first chapter that we come across them is about Kurt, Yana's chapter is a few chapters later. So yes, it is a different person, but we've already met them. Having 20 people, it does sound like a lot, but they kind of weave in and out of each other's chapter.
So it sounds like your advice to readers would be, trust me, be patient a little bit. It is going to connect, but the beginning is a lot of, like you say, it's a bit of a slow burn, and it's set up for some of these things that are coming down the line a little bit later.
It is definitely a slow burner. It's 500 pages, and it's a beast of a book. But give it a chance and stick with it, and it will make sense.
So you're writing more. You're on the second book now. You said you're about halfway through. How is that going? Is there a working title for it? Is that maybe that's still under wraps?
Not yet. There's not a working title. So the last few pages of the book, or the epilogue, it picks up where that leaves off.
Okay. And there's a big twist. We're not going to spoil the twist, but there's a big twist.
There's a big twist
towards the end. There's a couple big, larger twists, mysteries.
Yeah.
A little bit of a cliffhanger. Yeah.
So the book picks up right where the second book picks up right where the first leaves off. Literally right where it leaves off.
Okay.
So the second book deals with the fallout of what happens in the first and what the response to the first is. Hopefully it works. If it doesn't, I'm sure there'll be people who are willing to tell me.
Has your writing process changed at all from first to second? Have there been anything just based off of feedback that you've been given in general that you've tried to make more of an effort as you write? Or
Yeah, every time I send a book to a reviewer, and I'll probably maybe do the same to you if you have time. I send like a questionnaire of.
Okay, yeah, certainly, certainly.
So the questionnaire is what worked, what didn't work. It kind of asks the reviewer who their favorite character was and what they liked, and if the book was fast paced enough or what can be improved on. So I do I do get feedback from most of the people, certainly all the reviewers that read it, and I have I have tried to make an effort to get better, I guess, at writing it and maybe improve and tweak a few things. But yeah, it'll have the same format. It'll be 20 chapters, and each chapter will be a different person. The one thing that is changing in the second book is not all the chapters are about shadowless people. Some of them are just normal people, but they're affected by the shadowless.
Okay, okay.
So yeah, hopefully it works. Yeah.
I imagine one of the more difficult things about being in your position is you've put, your heart and soul into the book and a sizable financial investment
Mhm.
as well, and then you'll get reviews, some positive, some negative. And I'm just thinking, if I was that invested in this and this was my thing, my baby that I've created, and then people, provide some negative feedback, or some folks on the internet are not just a little heartless.
Yeah.
There's probably been some discouraging things as well. Has that been challenging at all?
Yeah. Like I say, when I wrote the book, it was the first thing that I had written since maybe university. I'd never done any creative writing before. So the process was all new. And as much as you try and polish the book, there are going to be some errors that slip through. And there's maybe one or two instances of head hopping in the opening chapters.
Okay.
I tried to try and go through and weed them out, but I think one or two still got through.
Meaning spots where the POV is kind of fluid.
Yeah, so not so much what people are thinking, but just ways that they react, and how the other person perceives that. So one or two has got through, and yeah, one I entered the book in a competition, and it got to the semi-finals, but didn't get to the final. And with the reviewer who was reviewing it, one of the judges who was reading it, said that's the reason he didn't put it forward, because there were maybe two instances of head hopping in
Ooh,
a in a
picky.
in a 500-page book. So yeah, it was pretty hard to take. And like I say, writing the second book, a lot of my time is spent going back and reading the first, because there's a lot of characters, and even I can't remember what they're like. So I have to go back and if some of them have different idiosyncrasies, or they use certain terms or language, then I have to make sure that if they said something in the first book, or they use a certain phrase, then I have to make
Right,
sure that I
right.
use it in the second book just to.
Yeah, you've got a lot of characters to keep their characterization straight, as well as their voices and the way they speak and think, and that must be a big challenge.
Yeah, so some of the characters are quite younger. The Shadowless also age differently. I think maybe 5 years of a shadowless life is equivalent to maybe one of a human. So
Uh-huh.
some of them are actually quite immature and use basic language and basic words, whereas you have a character like Planetar, who has a more extensive vocabulary than some of the others.
And I'm sure that through the process you have improved vastly as an author from day one, where you started penning out the very first rough draft of Shadowless, and that's probably been a journey in of itself.
Yeah, completely. The writing was quite rough around the edges in the early chapters, and like I say, that's where the head hopping has crept in the early chapters. But as it went on, then yeah, it grew. I have a really good proofreader, I have to say. She not only improves the grammar and the format, but she also questions character motives and plot lines.
Okay.
So yeah, she's really really good. Not cheap, but good.
Yeah, they rarely are cheap when they're good.
It's well, I think most of them charge maybe a penny a word. The first draft of Shadowless had 250,000 words, so that's
Let's see
two
if
and a
we can
half.
do the math in our
That's
heads
it's
here.
2,500, 2,500 right off the bat. But she was worth it, definitely.
Excellent. Well, I'm a big Sanderson fanboy, if you haven't picked up on that
Uh-huh.
yet. And he famously has said that when he started writing, he was a desk clerk at a hotel. He would work overnights. No one would ever be there. So he'd have tons of time to work. And I think he wrote 10 complete books before he got anything published. And a lot of that initial stuff that he wrote was just crap. And so I very much sympathize, with your journey here to become a stronger author. I don't empathize because I haven't gone on the journey myself yet, but I imagine one day that hopefully that I
Yeah,
get to that.
you'll if you ever do, and you try and get an agent or a publisher, then you'll definitely develop a thick skin rapidly.
Well, thanks so much for being on, Randall. This has been really interesting for myself and for our listeners, I'm sure, as well. Is there anything else that you would want people to know about your book, or where can they get it? How can they support you?
It's available on Amazon. I'm not too sure if it was available on Barnes and Noble. I think it may be. I'll have to check it out. It's also on a independent platform called Ink Library. But yeah, all I can say is it is a slow burner. It's not slow paced, but it does take a little bit of time and to get going. But if you stick with it, then definitely. You've read it, right? You can vouch for it.
Absolutely. Yeah. You're very accurate there. You do have to be a fan of the epic genre. And so, and along with that comes a lot of these slower burning chapters, like you say, in the setup. And once again, like Brandon Sanderson's books are not super fast, but people seem to love those. So I think there would be lots of fans for Shadowless as well. And it's Shadowless, one word. The cover has kind of like a god rising out of the ocean ominously. So that's the one you want to look for.
Yeah, yeah. It's on Kindle and it's on. It has a Goodreads page as well, so people can go and check it out.
All right. Well, thanks so much for being on again, and thanks for listening. This is Phantology's first ever author episode. We'll have to come up with some catchy phrase for this series, maybe the Writer's Lift series or something like that. If you like more of Phantology, you can find more at www.phantologybooks.com, and you can support the show at patreon.com/phantology_books. And once again, this has been a review of Shadowless with Randall McNally.